Welcome, everyone, to Week 4 Office Hours. I'm Joseph Coleman. Bob Coleman's getting off a plane right now in San Francisco at the ASBDC conference. How you doing, Lance?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here on a Friday afternoon.
It is.
Looks like we're going to get some rain here today, so it's a good thing.
Can you advance the second slide? You guys know how to ask questions. You can send me an email directly at joseph@colemanreport.com, or you can use the chat function in the GoToWebinar. Let's start with some polls. Have you ever had to request an emergency purchase from the secondary market on an SBA loan?
I think part of the reason I asked this question is, the propensity for participant banks to sell the guaranteed portion of their loans in the secondary market continues to grow, and it's understandable because the premiums on those loans are outstanding. And if you have a serious servicing issue that comes up and you go to the FTA Coleman with that servicing issue and it's denied, the only way to help the small business borrower is to request an emergency repurchase. So I was just curious if any of our participants had experienced a situation where they needed an emergency repurchase of a loan. Looks like just a small number have, but if you have, for instance, if you have a borrower that has cash flow problems but have a plan for improvement and you submit a 6-month deferment request to Coleman and they deny it, you can go to SBA and provide them information and support for that, and SBA may buy it back so we can help the small business continue their operation.
Right. Let's go to the second one. How comfortable are you using E-Tran for your servicing actions on your SBA loans, like changing maturity dates, etc.?
I'm just curious about this because having been in multiple roles related to SBA, having been the deputy director, SBA certainly is pushing more and more servicing actions out as unilateral actions. A number of those unilateral actions require participant banks to use E-Tran. An example of one that I did this week, and for our participants, I've worked on the other side of SBA lending as an SBA employee, deputy director, and as an LSP. Now, I don't know if our audience knows, but I've taken a role in a bank as SBA department manager, and this week I had to move a loan from liquidation back to regular servicing. So we're going to have to get more comfortable with E-Tran servicing because SBA is going to require us to continue to do more and more servicing actions that way. And then SBA 1, there's a follow-up question about SBA 1. We'll have servicing functionality at some point. We're going to have to use that. So it's a question to find out how comfortable you are. I think that you're going to have to become comfortable doing servicing actions either through E-Tran or SBA 1, and I'm not surprised that some still would like to have SBA's written confirmation of approval because it just makes you feel more comfortable. But for our banks, you need to become comfortable using E-Tran for your servicing actions, and when that functionality comes to SBA 1, you're going to have to be comfortable with that as well.
Right, and the follow-up is your bank signed up for SBA 1.
Well, and I guess my question, they're rolling this out region by region, and as you have for instance, flagels coming up for those in Florida, and I'm sure SBA 1 will become available for that area, at the flagel conference, but as you have your SBA lending conference, they're going to make SBA 1 available. I just went through the process of getting my bank set up on SBA 1 this week, and I'm not going to say that it was easy, but we got it done. So
yeah.
It looks like.
So it's primarily East Coast still, right? Region 3, and at Mid-America they said Region 6 was going up. So
Yeah, and my bank is in Region 6,
Okay.
and we were able this week to get access and get set up on SBA 1. But it's coming to all regions, and be prepared when you go to your lender conference. Make sure you participate in the SBA 1 trainings and get your bank set up on it. The great thing about SBA 1, the servicing functionality is not there yet. It will be probably within the next 6 to 9 months. Right now, the functional part of it is on the origination side.
Right.
And the great thing about that is if you submit a loan on SBA 1, your loan's going to move to the front of the stack of loans being considered if it's done by SBA 1 versus submitting through E-Tran.
Exactly, yeah. All right. The last one is, have you ever had an SBA loan assumed by another borrower?
You know, I bring this one up because assumptions of SBA loans are not unusual, but they don't happen extremely frequently. There's some requirements in the SOP 5057 if you have an assumption of an SBA loan. One of the confusing parts is frequently when you have a business owner and someone assumes their loan, quite often the existing business owner wants to keep an ownership portion in the business, even though there's been an assumption, and SBA typically will not allow that. Looks like 1/3 of our group has had an assumption, but I certainly encourage you, if you do have a request for an assumption, to go to the SOP 5057, do a Control F, type in loan assumption, and make sure you clearly understand what's required from a servicing perspective if there is a request for an assumption of an SBA loan.
Talk to us about week 4.
Week 4, we talked about how to handle note modifications, collateral modifications. I mean, I think the scariest thing about collateral modifications for a lot of lenders, and in the poll question where I asked, you know, are you comfortable doing unilateral servicing actions in E-Tran, eventually in SBA 1? Some of our participants said they still would like SBA's approval on that servicing. You know, after the final disbursement, a lender can release collateral unilaterally. And I know that's an uncomfortable situation, but it can in fact be done. Probably the most common situation where that occurs is as we all know, SBA frequently requires junior mortgages on the residential real estate. Maybe the guarantor wants to sell their home and you need to release it so they can sell it. That is a unilateral action. If it makes prudent lending sense, you can do it. Just make sure you properly document the file. We talk about management covenants and changes. Just had one of those come up with a borrower this week where they were changing from an S corporation to an LLC, and we walked through that process with them, and you want to make sure you do those appropriately. And we also talked about loan assumptions.
Yeah, we had a question about a further example about loan assumptions. Can you maybe give an example of that?
Well, the question was related to a loan assumption where the original owners of the business, the assumptees, were wanting to maintain an ownership position in the business until everything was, I think there might have been a side note or something in the assumption. They wanted to maintain an ownership position until that's paid off. One of the things the SOP is pretty clear about is on loan assumptions, the seller or the previous owner cannot have an ownership position in the business. So again, on loan assumptions, it's important for you to go into the SOP 5057, read the section about loan assumptions, and make sure you meet that criteria when you're considering a loan assumption on an SBA loan.
Let's get into this question about insurance. Our bank carries blanket insurance policies to cover our loans. The requirements of the bank policy are having the customer attesting to maintain insurance and obtaining proof of insurance prior to closing. Once those are complete, If we receive notice of cancellation or the customer moves their coverage and we don't get notice, the bank is still protected. These are limitations on loan amounts, so anything above these limits are tracked with our tickler system. Is this compliant with SBA?
Well, what SBA requires is that you just maintain insurance coverage to care and preserve the collateral. So if the bank has a blanket policy that if a piece of real estate that's securing an SBA loan, the borrower discontinues paying premiums and that insurance is canceled, and the blanket policy picks it up, that's adequate. Or if there's not a blanket policy to cover it, you may need to force place insurance on that particular policy. As a prudent lender, your requirement is just to make sure that you protect that property. It comes under the care and preservation of collateral. You want to make sure that it is always covered by insurance. And there have been examples in liquidation cases where the borrower did not maintain insurance coverage, the bank didn't pick it up, the property burns down. If that occurs and you don't have it covered, you have to expect SBA to repair you when you present your guaranteed purchase for whatever the value of that property. So as a good, prudent lender and to be compliant with SBA, you just have to make sure that the property is in fact covered by property and casualty insurance, whether it be a blanket policy or an individually forced place insurance policy.
Great. Let's. What's going on next week? Week 5.
Well, we roll into week 5, and we're going to talk about some servicing issues. Deferments are something that come up frequently. It's one of the more common SBA servicing actions. Your borrower is cruising along doing well, and one example of a borrower I had, the State Highway Department decided to tear up the road in front of their business and start repaving the road. As a result of that, the customers were having a hard time getting in the business. Sales dropped, cash flow dropped, the borrower was having a tough time paying the payments, and we came in and did a 90-day deferral of principal and interest payments to help the borrower through that difficult time. We spend a couple of sessions talking about deferments. We talk about the differences in deferment servicing actions on loans that are sold in the secondary market versus ones that are not sold in the secondary market. We also talk about dealing with senior liens. Again, it's very common on an SBA loan for the collateral requirements to include potentially a junior lien on the residential real estate of one of the guarantors or all of the guarantors. And we talk about the servicing requirements related to those senior liens. A good friend of mine and a lender out in Utah was asking about how to deal with senior liens when there's a second or third mortgage on residential real estate, and SBA does in fact have some requirements. We also talk about what to do when your customer goes into default. They become 60 days past due. How do you put an SBA loan into liquidation? And it's important to understand when you're supposed to put a loan into liquidation and how to put it in liquidation. And we're going to cover that. There's some good reading materials that go along with it. An article about the challenge of being in a junior lien position, a good article about protective bids that will help you understand how to place a protective bid at a foreclosure sale. Also, a nice article that I wrote about servicing your non-performing SBA loan.
And you can find all those in the notice board of your Litmos account. If you have any questions on accessing any of those materials, just give me an email, and I will send that to you. That's all we have, Lance. No questions? Are we clear? I think so. Send your questions to me or Lance throughout the week next week, and we'll see you next week for office hours.
Guys, thanks a lot. Have a great weekend.